The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and we are joined once again by the Archon himself, the greatest and latest of the Drukari menace, Archon Skari. Archon Skari, how are you doing?
Hello, Nick and audience. I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that. We are blessed to have you on the show. You are a staple Art of War coach, and you are a Drukari savant. And Drukari is a faction we have not had on the show in a while. They have not received that much love in quite a bit of time since they basically got a new detachment written. But you, nonetheless, have been tried and true and successful in your Drukari endeavors. And you've been able to pull some pretty amazing stuff off, willing GTs with Hellions, running Void Raven Bombers, all kinds of weird units you just don't really see in an army. You don't really see a niche, if you will. So in today's episode, folks, it's a part one of a two-part show. In part one, we're going to be talking about Drukari. We're going to be learning how they operate in the new Pariah Nexus meta. Rizvan and Martinez and I are going to have a conversation about exactly what we think the Pariah Nexus meta is going to look like and where Drukari fit into that. And he's got a new updated list that we're going to talk about for the new meta and how it operates on like a very strategic level. Then in part two, which you can subscribe to on patreon.com/AOW40K for $5 a month to help support the show and get access to part two of this episode along with 200 other episodes and our amazing Discord server. In that episode, we're going to talk about potential matchups. We're going to talk about what we expect to be doing well and is popular in the new meta, and how Drukari of all factions can hope to face those specific matchups and maybe try some unorthodox approaches and tactics that don't seem obvious to someone who hasn't put thousands of hours repping Drukari like Skari has. Does that sound good, Riz?
That sounds fantastic. Let's dive into the morsels of the soul nutrition.
The soul nutrition. All right, I can see here today that Skari's got his full Archon on. So I'll hand it off to you, Skari. What do you think is good, bad, and different in the new Pariah Nexus meta? Like, what do you think the big changes are?
So Pariah Nexus has given us a change to the game of Warhammer. Leviathan was a great start of the edition. The cards were fun, the missions were fun. But Pariah Nexus essentially updated these missions and sort of like parameters for primaries, mission rules for the new season. Now, of course, there's a bit of an emphasis on, battle line units. So some of the mission special rules sort of like allow battle line units to shine and become a little bit more versatile based on the mission format. Now, Drukari, historically, and that stays true right now, are good at mission stuff usually, and I don't know if you can agree or disagree with this, Nick, but I feel like edition to edition, time to time, like usually Drukari do a couple of things well. Number one, they're good at having lots of units that can do things, and number two, have lots of throwaway units that can disrupt the enemy from doing things, like scoring points.
You have so much trash, as we call it, just like small units to run around scoring, doing actions, that kind of thing.
That's right. So that remains true. And in Pariah Nexus, there seems to be a bigger emphasis on actions, which allows you get units to stand in a place and do a thing for a certain period of time, and you get points for it. Now, that means that I think Drukari came out of the Pariah Nexus change relatively in a good spot, because we don't really have to change our list dynamics too much, right? Like, we don't have to really try to make our lists any differently than we were before to play the missions. Well, we have lots of little units that can do actions and little trash stuff, right? And we've also got the ability, the speed and maneuverability with some of the key changes to something like the pivoting and rules and stuff like that, making it way easier for us to move our transports around and things like that as well. So
let's unpack that a bit for a second, because I think that's a nuance that maybe not everyone's picked up on. Basically, your transports are these weird pointy shapes that are very long and narrow.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
or
they're on
like
this.
Dorito shaped on the Venom, right? Which
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like lots of fins and wings and yeah.
And then they're under the circle base that's relatively small in comparison, and you can now just pivot for free if you're on a circular base. So, like, deploy sideways on the line, spin your raider for free, and basically gain 3 inches of movement or whatever it is, like on your whole army. Is how good do you think that is?
It's less. I think it's impactful. You know, a couple of inches here and a couple of inches there can win games, right? It's nothing novel to me, considering I've been playing since third edition, and that's just how it was forever. The vehicles could just pivot for free, essentially. Usually, and that the whole, you know, the introduction of the 10th edition way to move vehicles was kind of like weird. The thing I like the most, I think the most impactful part of it is the streamlining simplicity of being able to move a vehicle. Number one, vehicles can move through spaces that the base fits through, right? So something like a Venom and a Raider, it means that you just have to clear the base past a wall or in between crates or, in a like tight little spot. And as long as that little space can move through, you can move the entire vehicle through that space, which makes it feel a little bit more like a fly vehicle that could like just kind of go wherever they wanted to previously in other editions. The pivoting rule is a nice, clean way of just saying, look, just move your tank, and don't worry about and then just
it's so much simpler, right?
It's just
smoother. Yeah,
I think the biggest impact is the not having to use brain power to move a vehicle with trigonometry.
Yeah, that's definitely been a quality of life increase for sure.
Right. And even things like rhinos and land raiders and things that you can pivot, but you have to pay pivoting costs for. Just being able to move it and just pivot it and go, I just need to spin it this way, and I don't have to worry about it, like how many inches I'm using for that or whatever.
And that's the quality of life side, right? And we can all appreciate that. Do you think there's much to be gained from the tactical side, like advantage-wise?
Yes, like in terms of play-wise, there is, when you make a charge move, and you can pivot your vehicle for free and then measure from the hull because it projects down. Like there are, for anybody who doesn't know, vehicles that have a base, and a hull, project down onto the floor. So I'm measuring ranges from the tippity tip of my Raider's prow, right, which is like 3.5 inches from the edge of my base, or something like that. So if I spin this Raider around for free on a charge, now I'm 4 inches away from my target, or 5, whatever it is, 5 inches away from my target. So it makes a 9-inch charge like a 5-inch or 6-inch charge, right? So there are the ramifications of a rule like that are more an annoying one for an opponent than not. Considering a Raider or a Venom is not exactly a powerhouse in combat. It's just more annoying stuff, which a lot of the times means you're tying up a unit or tank shocking something that you need to try kill, or So are there ramifications? Yes. Is it impactful? Yes. I don't think it's as impactful as people might make it seem, unless you're using it with like a Tantalus or something, which can pivot and basically make a free charge, which is kind of silly.
I think that's a really honest take on it, right? Like, I've seen the internet kind of going crazy about the pivoting rules and how it's so abusable these days. And you do gain advantage to pivoting your tank to gain distance now. And for Drukhari are an army that can take advantage of that more than others. But you're charging a Raider into combat faster. What are we doing? This doesn't matter in most cases.
Yeah, usually you don't want your Raider to be engaged because you need to retreat back into the Raider. And the Raider needs to be behind a wall so that Raider doesn't get shot to hell, and then you lose all your transports because then you just lose. So unless you're in a desperate I played a game yesterday. I'm playing against the Knights, and I'm I need to try and do some mortal wounds to this Knight, so I had to charge this Knight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I had to tank shock it or whatever. All in all, Pariah I think is a good upgrade from Leviathan. I think Dark Eldar very well suited for the missions, and it has changed list building a little bit, which we'll get to when we go over my list and stuff, and kind of the choices I made to adapt the list to the new Pariah.
Yeah, You had mentioned in general that there are more actions to do, and that's definitely something that we found ourselves playing it and talking about it and whatever. Your army's full of little action doers, like you said, but other armies are not. So there's like a hidden value that you're getting that's also being subtracted from other armies, where armies are worse at scoring secondaries, worse at doing actions, and you're better at it. So that's like a whole double whammy in your favor on that side. Are there any other maybe hidden or subtle ways that your Drukhari have changed that aren't just like the balance state directly affecting them?
Yeah, so the changes to or the impact to sort of like an emphasis on battle line, I think is like a subtle sort of like buff to the Drukari as well. Because we already built armies with lots of battle line in them, and battle line tends to be sort of like a core around which Dark Eldar armies are made. Especially being able to use venoms to split our main battle line units like witches and Kabalites into multiple, even more little units of trash, right? So if you build a list with a witch squad, a couple of Kabalite squads, and take a couple of venoms, you go from 3 units of battle line to 6 units of battle line, and that's not even a fraction of the points you spent on your list, right? And I think that is massively valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having powerful battle line, it opens up secret agendas for you. It closes them off for your opponent, and it like actually helps you in certain missions because the special rules can often affect battle line units, like raise banners, for example.
Yeah, raise banners, or being able to shoot and do actions, or being able to, fall back into actions, or do them within engagement range with battle line units. One of my favorites is shooting and doing actions, or being able to come in from strat reserve. One on turn 1, for example, like having a little unit of 5 Kabalite warriors just in your back pocket that needs to come out and contain a table edge off to one side, and you're like, I'm just gonna bring them in over here, right? Turn 1 or whatever. It's handy to have, and it just helps you score points.
Yeah. Another thing that I have found with the secret agendas and just kind of way that 10.5 Pariah Nexus plays is that you can go second in certain scenarios and really just hold on to your home field objective for the entire game for 5 points a turn. That's 20 primary. And then do a secret agenda, like walk onto 3 objectives at the end of the game, or potentially get your warlord over there for some factions or whatever it might be. Walking onto 3 objectives is definitely the most generally easiest, and that's a really viable strategy to just like play a non-interactive game and score 40 primary anyway. Is that something that you have found or considering as a viable strategy for Drukhari? Maybe something you're concerned about playing against, and like if you're playing against like a hypercrypt army or a demon army that's just designed to be a non-interactive and score their points anyway? Like, what do you think about that dynamic now?
So secret missions are fun. I think they're way better than the Gambit system. Like I feel like they will be actually impactful in.
You're the only person I know who's actually taken a Gambit and won a tournament off of it. So, like, to hear you say that they're better than the Gambits, that is something.
Well, look, Gambits were Gambits. Okay, they were like a Hail Mary shot at winning, and the only reason I did it is because I tried it. Right, like most people didn't even read the Gambit cards.
No, I literally got that was an option in my games when I was playing. That just skip that step.
Nobody cared. Like, and the amount of people who messaged me being like, "What is a Gambit?" When I won a tournament with a Gambit, this like people weren't even using the Gambit. They didn't even read the cards, right? So look, the secret missions and the ability of Dark Eldar specifically to sort of play into them, I think is impactful. I think, because of the fact that we have lots of battle line and can kill battle line, for example, or we have a decent amount of like our Dark Eldar damage is quite good. Maybe we can't table an entire army like all the time, but that's another option. Keeping our Archon Warlord alive is something we try and do as much as possible. So being able to yeet him on the opponent's objective by the end of the game can be a viable option, considering we're super fast and can move pretty much anywhere with our little tanks and whatnot. And I think that there is strategy to sort of plan it, and you can play into the secret mission And like you said, just holding your home objective and kind of, making sure that you just play for a gambit can be something that's very viable in very terrible matchups, right? The key is being able to identify that terrible matchup and go, I need to stay in a corner or touch board edges, because if not, you're just going to kill me. And so I'm going to play very conservatively, and then I'm going to lunge in at the end for points, And that's, I think that opens a whole other play style for people who might really enjoy that defensive, reactive play style where they just kind of keep their whole army safe and alive for as long as possible, and then, just punish people afar with shooting from afar and then move in for the kill later.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the Drukhari playstyle, right? Like being adaptable to the situation and understanding like the matchup dynamics. That's a large part of what we're going to focus on part 2 is like how do you approach different matchups with your Drukhari. But let's focus a little bit more on your specific list. And I know you revised your Leviathan list to kind of work in the Pariah Nexus meta. Why don't you go ahead and just read top to bottom what that list is?
Absolutely. So this list is a adaptation from a list I took to a GT in Ottawa. I ended up winning. I had a very, very good run against very tough opponents, but I really found the value in the Void Raven Bomber. And so I've stuck with them. I've absolutely loved having the bombers. They don't follow the rules of line of sight, and they have incredible guns. And they have really helped into the current meta. So the list itself is a Warlord Archon, a secondary Archon, a Beastmaster, and Lilith. And that's like my core character units. 2 units of Cavalite Warriors. Each unit has a Blast Pistol, a Phantasm Launcher, all the upgrades, all the guns, basically. And a unit of Witches as well. Then for dedicated transports, I have a Raider, 3 Venoms, and then we combine it with a quart of the Archon, which I'll explain when we go through that. 2 Chronos, so 2 single Chronos, 1 single unit of Incubi, 2 units of Mandrakes, 2 units of Scourge, 5 strong, 1 with Dark Lances, 1 with Haywire Blasters, and 2 Void Raven Bombers armed with the Dark Sides and the Void Raven Missiles. That's it. That's 2,000 points on the nose.
I gotta say, Skari, it looks very unassuming. I mean, most of your lists do, but this is a little eclectic even for my taste. You've got like 2 Scourge squads with different weapons, Void Raven Bombers, a handful of Venoms, and dudes inside the Venoms. How does this come together on the table in your words?
So this is a list that takes you out on the go turn. Does not seem like a list that can do a lot, but when it hits you really hard. I think my record has been killing something like 12 Exalted 8-bound in a single turn, plus a couple of Rhinos and a whole unit of Corn Berserkers or whatever.
How do you do that? This army looks like it's like a pile of nothing. Like, where does this damage come from?
Well, this army does way more damage than you think. So the key with this list is the versatility. Now, the reason I got like a quart and the Incubi and then a couple of units of Cabalites is it allows my Archons to really sort of be flexible in where I need their reroll wound rolls. And it really leverages the power of rerolls, like reroll hits, reroll wounds, high strength. So the court usually goes with 5 little Cabalites with guns and a Raider with the Archon. And they, that little unit has fights first, has lethal hits with a pain token, gets reroll hits, reroll wounds. And so they can
1,000 different weapons too.
They have a ton of weapons. They have like battle shock mechanics as well with the Medusa. So you essentially use them in the Raiders like as a get out, shoot something and kill it, charge something and kill it, and then jump back into the Raider. That court is excellent. They can take out Catan, they can take out avatars, they can take out like tanks, and lethal hits just adds up. especially.
Am I missing something, Skari? Like this is like a Dark Lance, a Blaster, a Shredder, like one of each weapon type of thing, and then like 5 dudes with Splinter rifles. Like where's this Catan killing power coming from? Are we just hoping that we hit wound?
The 5 guys with Splinter rifles get split in the venom. They go somewhere else. Yeah. No, this is just the blast pistol. This is just a blast pistol, a Medusa, a Shredder, a Blaster, 2 like the Archon's blast pistol, the Dark Lance. So it's the Catan power is not with shooting. That's not what it's with the running in with lots of little attacks and just doing lethals in combat a lot of the time. Because you just have volume of fights. And then when you get out of a transport and charge, they have lance. So then they're wounding most things on 5s, right? And then you just get full rerolls to hit and wound with a pain token. So it's just volume. Like this unit is volume of dice in combat. And then with shooting, you can sometimes get away with making everything sustain 2. And then you've got like 2 blast pistols that you fish for 6s for. And then you can get 5 blast pistol hits from 2 blast pistols. And then you can do a Dark Lance that rolls a 6 to hit, get 3 Dark Lance hits from a Dark Lance. That sort of thing.
Right. Okay, so it's a lot of like subtle damage as always, but that seems a little bit unreliable to me, right? You're just hoping you roll 6s here.
No, that's every once in a while. What I'm saying is like reliably, and the key is to like target the right things with it, right? Like you don't just go in and expect it to kill anything, but it's very good at doing enough damage to make sure something dies.
Right. I've definitely played games against the court and have been pretty impressed by them basically just like beating up on some small stuff on a flank and punching things that are below their weight class essentially, and they'll do a good job at that.
Yeah, like I love my court. I think they're one of the best units in the book. Like they're like you can run them solo if you want. If you just want like another fights first combat unit to run the Cabalites by themselves. The key as well is the Archons can either, if I'm going against like a combat army, the Archons go into the like incubi and the court, right? And if I'm going into something where I need to shoot and my combat is relatively useless, then my Archons go into the Cabalites with guns, right? The Blaster, Dark Lance, and Shredder, and Splinter Cannon. But giving them reroll hits and wounds makes them way more efficient than they should be.
Wow. So you actually change where your characters go based on matchup. That's something that's very interesting. But we'll talk about that more in part 2. Yeah. Where does the rest of your damage come from? I mean, like, I get the court.
Yeah, so then the Scourge are okay. Like the Haywire Blasters are excellent against tanks, and then the Dark Lances are good at like chipping some damage away from tanks or forcing people to use strats like Smoke or Armor Contempt just to kind of drain resources, which is really useful. And the main damage comes from the Void Raven Bombers. Those guys are just amazing.
I mean, this is really the Skari special. You're the only person I know who's been on the Void Raven train, and you have been converting people to the cult of Void Raven. So why don't you tell me what the hell are these planes doing here? I thought planes was like 2018.
They were 2018. They aircraft. Like at the start of the edition, it was really funny. I ran a list that had 4 aircraft in it. I ran a list that was 2 Razor and Jet fighters and 2 Void Raven bombers for a lot, but that was in the Real Space Raiders detachment. And it was funny because this list started more as I want to say a meme, but it was different than a meme. It was more like I needed to prove a point to myself that I could kind of still play with whatever I wanted to. I didn't have to just play with like the most efficient things to do well. And I was like, I'm just going to prove a point, right? And so I took the Void Raven Bombers and I practiced with them. I think something that helps is I played like 60 games with this list. You know what I mean? Like it's not like a fluke, you know?
No, of course. I mean, you're here for a reason, right? Like you know what you're doing.
It's practice, a lot of practice, a lot of like, okay, what's good and what's bad, and where am I putting my damage, and like this is like a lean and mean list where every bit of fat has been stripped from this list. Like there is nothing, like everything has to be used well.
So Skari, this list of yours, I assumed it was like a well optimized machine because you wouldn't play like some bad stuff. But with that said, you do play a lot of Drukari that leads to exploring and experimenting, not always playing like a tried, true, brutal, optimal version. And like you just said, you want to play armies that are sometimes going to challenge you and push you in different ways off meta for, just sake of doing it. Is this like a version of the list where you think this is like the Drukhari list, the best thing you could write right now? Or is this like some snowflakey thing?
So I started it as a meme, and then I figured out I struck gold with this list. This list,
I love when that happens. That's like the most fun way to come up with a good list.
This list, I have tabled more people with this list than I can remember over the last like 40 to 60 games.
Is that you flexing a savage skill advantage over opponents, or is that like actually the power of the list?
This is the power of, I'll tell you, like into the current meta, or the meta that this was developed for, this list did incredible. Blood Angels, Bully Boys, right? Like Chaos Space Marine, Renegade stuff. Like this list just does really good. It honestly, it leverages the fact that Flyers have not been seen since 2018 in a lot of ways.
So talk to me about these Void Raven bombers. I think they're definitely like the part of your list that raises the biggest flags to me. They're 430 points in an army that is otherwise very cheap, and they have a lot of strange rules, frankly, that people may not be used to. Like, how do the Flyers play on the table, and how do you use them?
So they have to start in Strat Reserve. In reserve. They start in reserve, not Strat Reserve, but they arrive like they were in Strat Reserve. You can rapid ingress them if you want and stuff like that. The key about the Flyers is the equipment. So they have 2 dark sides each. So each dark side is 6 shots, which is, I think, strength 8, AP 4, 2 damage. And missiles, which then you can pick either 3 damage missiles, which would be 3 shots, or 1 damage missiles, which are like strength 7, AP 1 blast. So having a overcharged plasma cannon on each of these things are like 12 plasma cannon shots. Okay, we're looking at 12 strength 8, AP 4, 2 damage shots.
12 strength 8, AP 4, 2 damage shots. That's like quite the Marine killer.
That is not only the Marine killer, but against vehicles, you'll get a couple of wounds through. The AP 4 has been incredible in the current game.
Yeah, AP is really, really strong these days. There's a lot of army cover is very accessible. A lot of good armor saves out there. Armor of Contempt is a thing. AP4 is a real breakpoint.
Yeah. So the Void Raven Bomber has been good into every army that I have played into. Just everything. There hasn't been one army that I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have these 12 2 damage plasma cannon shots. Right?
So they hit on 3s. Are you often giving them pain tokens to help them out?
Yeah,
here?
So if you really need to kill, you can give them each a pain token, and then they reroll hit rolls, which then makes them incredibly efficient at picking a target. And then the secondary thing that works really well for them is the fact that they don't follow the rules of the game. And namely, right, depending on what terrain format you play on, because I play a lot of WTC, right? But footprints do not save you from bombers.
So what do you mean by that, footprints?
Well, aircraft still use true line of sight. So when you're behind, a lot of folks over the last year have gotten used to hiding their little crap chaffiness they need to play the game behind footprints of ruins, like these big rectangular footprints.
Yeah.
And that has given them a sense of safety. A Void Raven bomber does not care about that footprint, and if it can see you and you're in range, it shoots you and you're dead.
So it's the true line of sight that basically offsets the terrain you're playing on, because functionally Games Workshop has introduced these layouts with the footprints, as you call them, which lets you abstract where the terrain is. So even if you don't have necessarily big giant line of sight blocking terrain, you can't see through the footprint of the terrain feature, despite the fact that your walls might have windows or cracks or whatever it might be.
Correct.
And you're a plane, and you're 8, 9 inches in the air, and you're wide, and you see over terrain, over footprints, through cracks, and you actually just kill people.
You just shoot people, which allows the Dark Eldar to do 2 things, which is something that I hadn't been able to do in previous lists.
That's almost a form of indirect fire, right?
Exactly. It allows you to get that sort of I don't need to kill the stuff right in front of me. And that's the thing about previous Dark Eldar lists that I'd built, is it was great. There were MSU, you had multiple beast packs, but it was like a layered approach where you sort of had to deal with the thing that your opponent gave you in front every single time.
Right.
And so if your opponent was something like Custodes or whatever, like unless you could kill that one Custodes brick in front of you, like you were going to have a tough game. Right?
Right.
And so this has allowed me to dictate the pace of the game where I'm like, I need to kill that unit of infiltrators back there that's holding that objective dead. Right? I need to kill, you're staging your unit of Seraphim, or, you're staging this thing behind this building. If I can see your like bolt pistol, you're dead. You're just, that whole unit gets wiped off the map. And what it allowed me to do is then leverage the damage in my other units to really hyper focus and be able to be very non-interactive. And that's like another part of this list. This list does not interact with you. So even though I have few units, you don't get to interact with me at all.
Explain that one to me. How are you able to pull off like a non-interactive strategy with these planes? Because as I imagine, as much as they can always see your opponent after they're done getting shot can always see you. And then I know you have the ability to go back into your venoms and after you like shoot with your warriors at the end of your turn, but like that adds up slowly, and ultimately you do have to like play Warhammer. So like how do you actually pull off a non-interactive strategy here?
So you kill the stuff that can stop you from scoring points or allows your opponent to score points, right? So you go for the point scoring. As for the planes, it's 400 points of your list. So you want your opponent to shoot the planes. Kill the planes, please.
Really? So you're like totally cool with that?
I will lose my planes more often than not. Like there's a nice ability to give one of the planes a 4-up invul with a strat, right? So that makes the planes a little tougher to kill. Depending on what the terrain is, if you're playing WTC, you can actually use the big piece of terrain to block line of sight to the plane, But forcing your opponent to shoot into planes is good for me because that's points. They just kill stuff. They don't score any points on the table, right? So I want my opponent to waste resources on trying to kill the planes.
Interesting. Okay, so that's still your mindset with Drukhari. You're like just still trying to score points and play that game, but your offense is more of a way to table them, but also a distraction in a way.
Correct, because it's like it is a distraction. You're not safe anywhere on the board. Unless you fly, you can't charge them, right? Like you can't damage them in combat, so you have to shoot them. They're one of the only planes that still has stealth, so they're -1 to be hit, and you can give them a 4-up invul save, which has saved it against things like rail guns, for example.
Right. I mean, having that 4+ invul save goes a long, long way to keeping yourself alive. I mean, and 4s be fickle. We always say that.
Yeah, 100%. But having a 4 is better than not having a 4. And it's good to you can either shoot more at it or you can change and shoot at the other one, right? So that's up to you, right? And then the non-interactive part is using the venoms jump in and jump out, right? Which I use a lot for everything. It's like you go up to a wall, you jump on the other side, you shoot them, and then you pop back into your venom so they can't interact with you in any way. Things like witches and incubi can go in, charge into combat, and then jump back into their venoms, right? And then you've got the court, which can move a raider up, they can get out, they can shoot, charge something, and then retreat back into the raider as well. So all in all, I've got raiders behind walls or things on objectives, which I've stickied with Cavalite Warriors so that I don't have to really have stuff on objectives I've kind of cleared. And then I've got raiders and venoms behind walls that pop in and out, so that now you have to decide whether you shoot the Void Raven bombers that are tabling you or you kill a venom or two and then dislodge all its contents onto an objective, as an example. So it's like it provides your opponent with lots of dilemmas, and none of them are good. Meanwhile, I'm scoring my points and trying to tackle my opponent's ability to score points. So it sort of strangles their scoring ability. And that allows me to just, win the game, right? Like that's what the math wins this game. It's not about, you don't have to do anything fancy. You just get more points than your opponent.
Right. Absolutely. So it's a very play a minimalist game of Warhammer, just try to find that big go turn, as you put it, like hide, chill, do whatever. And then when you can do crippling damage, are you then from there playing the game a little more proactively?
Okay. Like I said, this list does way more damage than people assume. Like you immediately look at this list and go, right? But this list will mess you up with the amount of damage it does.
What kind of profiles are you weak into, if any? I mean, like, I look at this and I can totally see how you're great at killing like Marines on foot. I can totally see how you're good at killing like Satan because they don't have like great saves and they're very vulnerable to the poison keyword. But like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, someone puts like a bunch of tanks or like 200 orcs in front of you, something ridiculous like that. Like those extremes of the meta, which are relatively popular. Do you have the teeth to like kind of chew through those?
Yeah, so Horde Orcs would definitely be something that is not very easy to play against, right? Like
Right.
that's definitely something that you'd look at and go, I would have to, really like play a good game of Warhammer to make that happen. I'd have to leverage my skill set there.
Yeah.
I feel like a bunch of great unclean ones, for example, with like feel no pains and stuff, would actually be kind of annoying to deal with. But you haven't
Yeah.
really seen that in the meta in a while.
No, and I mean that's a larger part of our part two conversation too. Is like, what do we think is actually going to be in the meta?
Correct, right? Horde Tyranids, especially like guard and like this, like we'll go through all the matchups, but there are like things like Grey Knight Grandmaster spam, right? Just the Dread Knights that can be a bit of a pain in the butt as well, right? But a whole tank army like Ironstorm was not an issue for this list.
Really?
Mhm.
Where does your anti-tank come from? Like, I get the Scourges can add up. Haywire's good into tanks. The Dark Knights don't suck if you can hit them. Where
That's
is it
just
coming from?
It's reroll hits and wounds with Archons and Cablites because it doesn't look like a lot, but it makes it very reliable anti-tank.
Yeah, makes it a lot
And
better
then-
for what it is.
Correct. And then Haywire and Scourge is all you need when you can just bounce back and forth and don't get shot ever. So you just have multiple turns of using those two units.
So you're totally okay with this like anti-tank package just being spread across multiple turns instead of like being front loaded into one big turn.
Correct. You only have to kill 1 or 2 tanks at a time. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you have to try and kill all of them. And then as soon as they get close, then you have grenades, you've got tank shock, you have vicious blades, you have the court, you've got the incubi with lance. If you put an archon in, with lance to run in, archon, the incubi themselves can flip a tank in a combat phase, right? So there's lots of options in that list.
How do you identify when to play the KG game that you basically start out playing versus when is the go turn?
So you play the KG game for 1 or 2 turns at the minimum, and then as soon as you want to commit the bombers to the table, that's like your go turn.
Right. So usually around turn 2, maybe turn 3.
Yep, turn 2, turn 3. The key is to make sure that you're in a position to hit the opponent so hard that they just have a really hard time coming back. And the bombers really allow this because your frontline troops, which is incubi, cablites, the court, can really do damage to the front line of like their, the pieces they put in play. And then the Void Raven bombers can either mop up those pieces or kill the entire reserve units that they're going to try and trade with you, which then allows you to just not trade. Right, that's the key. Is it sort of changes the dynamic of the game from I send a unit in and it dies and I trade to I send a unit in and you have nothing to trade back into me because the bombers killed whatever you're going to send in to trade.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like you said, a way to attack not only their front lines, which is like a typical way to play Warhammer, is like the things that are playing the game in midfield or what you can attack and deal with, and the things that are staged behind the ruins or like further back or what's going to come for you in the future. And having those Void Raven bombers attack the back while your frontline stuff, the Archons, the Incubi, whatever it might be, attacking the front, kind of lets you attack all of it at once. When do you look for in terms of like when to bring the Void Ravens in? Like, is it just like the first good shooting activation you get, you bring them in, and that's what you take, or is there like specific targets you're trying to chase?
So usually I want to bring them in as soon as possible. Like sometimes I'll wait if depending on how much shooting my opponent has or how good the terrain is. Like on WTC, sometimes I rapid ingress one of the planes as well. So I kind of wait for my opponent's second movement phase to do that, and then bring the second plane in my movement phase, right? So then I can potentially do a bombing run, for example, and maybe threaten something that's behind the like their home base building. Especially if it's in WTC terrain, which is like giant buildings. things, right? So line of sight's a little harder to get on those terrain sets. But the key is it does take practice to get the instinct for that, right? That's like where the practice of the list has come in. It isn't set in stone. It varies based on mission, opponent, right? Like you can't just say, oh, turn 2, it's go time, right? You have to kind of go, well, do I only put one plane in this turn because I just want to put a 4-pinball on it, and then bring another plane the next turn and just make sure I have a plane in 2 separate turns, or do I need both of them right now? Like, did you screen out my planes where I can't really get
right.
range to what I need to shoot, for example, right? So you have to be flexible, right? At the same time, it rewards you for getting aggressive, and like anything else, especially because my damage is spread out over so many different things, you cannot split your fire, right? Like, you have to focus on 1 or 2 things you want to kill it, move on, right? You can't just like go, oh, 1 Dark Lance is enough to kill this thing. That's never going to work.
Right, you have to have those layers setting up, and I think that's a part of a lot of playing Drukhari well and just playing Warhammer well, is having those redundancies in place so that you're not like, even though Matt says I should kill this tank with the Dark Lances and Haywire Scourges, if I don't, there's no backup plan. Like, having redundancies is just like generically a really good thing in Warhammer.
Agreed.
So,
and then when all else fails, you just have a lot of little crap units that are good OC. You can go in and stop your opponent from scoring primary.
definitely. I mean, you still have a great contesting game. And that really leads me to my next question. How do you handle primary, like, as a concept? Like, secondaries make sense. You have tons of units, tons of actions, easy. What about primary? You're made of flimsy paper, Drukhari.
Yeah, you don't need to hold any objectives after you sticky them, is how I play primary.
You sticky because that's like your vehicle rules, allowing you sticky objectives as you're on it, and then you just kind of leave and force your opponent towards them.
Yeah, so Cabalite Warriors, of course, in a Venom, right? Or Cabalite Warriors in a Transport, or Cabalite Warriors in general have sticky objectives, right? So that I leverage the sticky objectives a lot. It is one of the rules I use the most to score primary. But it's not just about sticking them, is that you have to try and keep them sticky, right? So like if they have 3-inch deep strikes or stuff like that, like you have to get more wary about who you put where to make sure that you keep your objectives. But in the early game, it's about the beast pack and making sure you turn that game into a hammer and anvil, right? Which is what I try and do a lot. Is essentially stop trying to control all the objectives, just control 1 or 2, depending on which ones you need, and then kill the stuff and then move into that spot. But the beast pack allows you to move block your opponent early in the game, which then allows you to sticky usually one of the objectives in no man's land, unless it's like doing a war or something like that, in which case it's a little harder. But most places play Crucible or sweeping engagement. Not sweeping engagement. Crucible battle,
search and destroy,
whatever. So you use that beast pack to pin your opponent's flank move from their deployment zone, sticky to objectives, and then kill anything that comes close, basically.
Very
because
nice.
because you force your opponent to sort of like engage you and come into you, that's when they overextend, and then your Void Ribbon bombers can pick apart their army.
Now, are you trying to like go first and aggressively move block with this army, or do you prefer going second, having that bottom turn advantage?
So I have a higher go second win rate on average in competitive play. It's only a couple of percentile points, but I can do both.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I mean, I'm really excited to talk about like how you approach your actual games and all that with this army, because I feel like so much of it is like the devil is in the details. Before we do that, which is going to be on our Patreon, patreon.com/AOW40K for everybody who wants to join us, I have one more question for you, Skari.
Yeah.
Obviously, this list is like the product of you playing Drukhari for as long as I've known you and much longer. And you are like a true savant when it comes to that stuff. How can someone aspire to replicate similar results with whatever faction it is that they're playing? Maybe not over the course of 20 years.
So I think one of the things you have to do is understand and learn the difference between practice and competition. And I think
What do you mean by that?
So if I were to practice, do you play tennis, Nick, or anything?
I do play tennis, actually. Did you know that?
No, I just asked the question. I play tennis, so
let's play tennis sometime.
We should. I like using a tennis analogy. Like if you're practicing tennis, like you're just having a game with friends, right? You're not trying to win a match or whatever. You try things. You try things with your swing. You see where the ball goes. You like hit it differently. You practice your serve. You're not really taking each serve too seriously. You know what I mean? You're like, I'm going to try spin the ball. I'm going to try get it in that corner. Like you're testing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't have any impact on your self-esteem.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No. Yeah. So basically, you're willing to try stuff in practice games that are totally different just for the sake of learning, and you just view practice as practice and don't get your ego attached to the result of the game.
Correct. And I think a lot of folks out there would do well with that mentality. Whereas,
I completely
you're trying to win every practice game. Stop trying to win every practice game. You have to practice during your practice games to make sure you have a bank of information to use when you're in competition.
It's really funny you say that, because for me personally, this is like such reaffirming advice for where I am in my Warhammer journey. I'm personally really trying to get ready for WTC, and that's like the highest level competition that you can really find in this game. And you have to really know your matchups inside and out and how you're going to play all of them. So we're practicing and we're doing like TTS and like in-person games and just trying to talk through our matchups and our matrices. And across the past 2 practice weekends, I have actually not really won many games. I've only beaten like 1 or 2 armies out of like 10. I have a lot of draws. I have a few small losses. And through that, it's part of that practice mindset. In my practice games, I have been like intentionally trying things, maybe taking an aggressive line to see if it's possible instead of taking a safe line, or maybe like being experimental with my lists, or specifically stress testing matchups I deem are difficult, like specifically drilling 40K as opposed to like just competitively playing 40K.
Yeah, we play. I 100% agree. It's so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like, it's been quite a journey because, like, on one hand, I'm not really winning any games, and that's cause for concern as we approach the submission in the event itself. On the other hand, I'm not trying to win these games. I'm trying to learn these games. I'm not trying to play Warhammer. I'm trying to train Warhammer, and they're very different skills, and you have to like recognize that.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things where you will never know what it's like to reserve half your army unless you do it. You will never know what it's like to do a secret mission unless you try it. You will never know what it's like to use Incubi as a screen against creations of bile, because Incubi are worthless for anything else in that matchup, unless you do it. Right?
Stop. You're giving away too much sauce, Skari. I can't handle Incubi screening. It's too next level for me.
Yeah, sometimes they're useless. You just have to use them as a screen.
The Incubi screens. This is what we're here to unpack in part 2, folks. Skari's going to break down the game by game, how he approaches specific matchups. We're going to talk about when the Incubi are supposed to screen, because apparently hitting them in combat is useless. It's going to be awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Skari. It's always such a blast having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'll see you guys on episode 2.
Absolutely. So to subscribe to episode 2, please check out our Patreon. It's $5 a month. You get access to this show, 240 plus other episodes of the same style of content, part 1, part 2 episodes, and of course, an amazing Discord server. So in part 2, Skari and I are going to talk about the matchups, the meta, and basically how to pilot this Drukhari army into a variety of matchups in the field. If you're interested in learning the game and becoming your best, do definitely subscribe to that episode. Patreon.com/AOW40K. It really helps us keep producing the show that we love so much for you. We can't thank you enough for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you in part 2. And if not, we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.